Here is some money for a cup of tea, you tot. Please review Katawa Shoujo. P.S. Hanako is best girl, you asshole. Sure? Easiest $100 I ever made. I remember this being talked about everywhere about a decade ago, by people who usually don't delve into the strange world of visual novels and gal games. The rare specimen that somehow managed to transcend the genre's niche and build quite a dedicated fanbase. I myself remember hearing about it at the time from this content creator I watched every now and then. The less said about this guy, the better, but let's just say the realm of 2D women was simply not enough for him. Anyway, let's briefly go over the unique origin story of this game, which is as interesting as the game itself. The idea was originally conceived by Japanese doujinshi artist Raita. You might be familiar with him as the character designer for the Valkyria Chronicles series. Occasionally some of these designs reveals Raita's roots as a self-published doujin artist, particularly when it comes to the breasts. In the year 2000, he penned a hentai doujin based on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which included an omake page at the end for a proposed dating sim called Katawa Shoujo, Disability Girls, a gal game with disabled heroines as your main targets of affection. It only included some rough character designs and basic ideas, but this single page captured the imagination of 4chan many years later. Some of the more passionate members of the board founded their own development team, 4 Leaf Studios, and worked to make the game a reality over the course of 5 years. Which brings us back to the finished game, Katawa Shoujo, which ended up being a lot more tactfully handled than you'd expect from a page out of a doujin adapted by members of 4chan. Certainly more tactfully handled than some of the jokes in this video. The story follows a student named Hisao after he's transferred to a school for the disabled because of a debilitating heart condition. There he meets others with a variety of physical disabilities who help him adjust to his new life at the school. There are 5 routes corresponding to the 5 lead heroines. First we have Emi, an energetic track team runner with no legs. Hanako, the shy and aloof burn victim. Lily, the motherly blonde beauty who also happens to be blind. Rin, an eccentric artist with no arms. And finally, Shizune, the authoritative yet deaf class representative. How it utilizes each girl's disability to tell a story is very interesting, and could have easily been done very poorly. The characters aren't entirely defined by their disabilities, but they have clearly shaped their worldviews in significant ways. It's the perfect middle ground that is both tactful while also staying true to Raita's original concept. And what I mean by that is that there's hentai scenes. Each one makes sense within the context of the story and are well developed, but if you'd prefer, there is an option to turn them off entirely. I obviously can't show you any of these scenes in this video, so here's another picture of Juwaru instead. Anyway, as I said, each girl's disability is used effectively to tell a unique story, while also delving into much broader themes. I'll be giving my thoughts on the 5 routes, and by the end, we'll answer the age-old question: who is best girl? We already know his answer to this question, so let's talk about her first. There are 2 types of disabled characters in this game, and maybe even in real life as well. Those who are born that way, and those who suffer some kind of life-changing accident. From a storytelling perspective, the latter promises a much more tragic and engaging tale. And this is why I suspect I found Hanako's route to be the most interesting. She's a shrinking violet whose shyness is made much worse by her appearance, and she isn't easy to get close to as the protagonist discovers. Why would you want to get close to this kind of person? The game already knows the answer, of course. You're compelled to by sympathy, and this is the crux of her story. This one questions Hisao's underlying motivation for wanting to romance Hanako and, by extension, the players. This uncomfortable question permeates much of her route, but by the end, you come to see past her scarring and understand her as a person, a recurring theme in all of these routes. Emi is the other character whose disability came about because of an accident, but unlike Hanako, she's determined to stop it from defining her, and is successful on the surface. However, as you might expect, there are some deeply repressed issues that arise as she gets closer to the protagonist. This one is probably the most simple and straightforward of all the routes, and because of this is also the shortest. To me, it lacked the depth of the other routes and depends heavily on how much you like Emmy. There aren't too many surprises here. It's not a bad route by any means, but it is one of the weaker ones. The rest of the heroines were born with their disabilities, so there isn't as much in the way of shocking reveals. Lily, for example, doesn't have nearly as much baggage to overcome as, say, Hanako, and much of her route lacks conflict because of it. It's nice and pleasant, and builds to a good climax, but it is a little dry and boring in places. It's the sweet, slow burn of a love story for those looking for something maybe a little less cliché than Emmy and Hanako's routes. Shizune's route is all about barriers of communication, a significant hurdle for someone who is deaf, as you can imagine. It's a very understated route that focuses more on the friendship between this small group of friends. There's romance in it, but it's not as prominent as it is in the other routes, and there's no big, satisfying conclusion that ties everything into a neat bow. Finally, we have Rin, one of the more profound and nuanced routes. Like Rin herself, it's elusive and hard to pin down exactly, but it's fascinating nevertheless. It's not just about figuring out who Rin is as a person, it's also about Rin figuring out who she is as a person as well. Of all the routes, this is the one that has the least to do with disabilities. It feels like you could completely remove that aspect in places and very little of the story would change. Maybe that's the point though. These are just people at the end of the day. It's also worth mentioning the protagonist, who, because of his heart condition, has an interesting story of his own that consistently relates to all of the heroines. The supporting characters are also really good and memorable. I particularly enjoyed the wacky antics of Kenji, who is a good Western take on the classic foolish best friend archetype you see in a lot of visual novels. I think I probably agree with our friend Corey over here. Hanako is best girl. I enjoyed her route the most, but pretty much all of them are heartbreaking stories about love, friendship, and, specifically in regards to the protagonist, mortality. Honestly, I'm not sure why it took me so long to get around to playing this. Almost a decade exactly. I love visual novels, and I especially love strange, independently produced visual novels. I think we all know who is to blame, but in all seriousness, I love that this thing exists at all, considering its bizarre origin story. It could have easily been a random 4chan thread that went absolutely nowhere, but because of dedicated individuals from around the world, it became a real thing worth celebrating. Katawa Shoujo truly stands as a monument to the power of the internet to bring people together. You can really feel the passion that went into making it. So thank you to Corey for finally making me play it. And for the hundo, of course. It's freeware, so I guess I'll just leave a link for where you can download it in the description. Now, I'm not going to do this every time someone throws $100 at my coffee. I'll consider it, but let me know first, okay? I've been Snickety Slice, I'll see you around.